Okay. I'm glad to be back. Thank you guys for having me work on part 2 in this cybersecurity series. Today I'm going to be talking to everyone about wireless attack techniques. And, I want to kind of start off by, breaking the entire presentation into 4 parts. So we can go into the next slide and I'll actually break those 4 parts. The first part is the actual protocol, the wireless protocol. And we're going to be going into depth about what it is before we can start attacking it. We need to understand what we're attacking. The second one is Wi-Fi security. Built on top of that protocol, how are we protecting, how are we authenticating clients and keeping the network secure? And the third one, I'm going to be going into roughly 16 different types of wireless attacks against Wi-Fi networks. And last but not least, I'll be throwing in a bonus section based off of Bluetooth hacking. And one of the things that I kind of want to break down for you guys is that famous TV show, Mr. Robot, where Elliot actually breaks into a prison and releases all the prisoners just by simply hacking into a cop's car, into his Bluetooth keyboard. So I'll be showing you guys exactly how those commands were sort of carried out. So we can get started into the next section, talking about the protocol, the 802.11 protocol, also known as the WLAN, WLAN. It's an ever-evolving set of standards. Back in its early days, they had many well-documented security flaws and vulnerabilities because it inherently runs off of radio frequency technology. And so I'll be going to the next slide and sort of explaining how Wi-Fi works. So like I said, it is based off of a wireless radio frequency, and it's a two-way sort of connection between 2 nodes. Now, in order to have this connection work, is both parties need to have a transmitter and a receiver. And that's the way that they can actually send data back and forth via, wireless signals. The way that sort of networks are built is that one party, known as the AP, or the access point, acts as a type of walkie-talkie, and they sort of set the network configuration standards. They'll utilize terms like SSID, and that's kind of just that network name that we see when we sort of scan the airwaves for wireless networks. And SSID stands for Service Set Identifier and information about the network. It'll transmit information like what kind of channels, what kind of frequencies it supports, and also the encryption. Sort of the protocol, the 802.11 protocol, didn't really have many strict sort of security standards when it first came out. And it is basically because of how it falls inside of the OSI model, which is the next slide here. And here we see the OSI model and where 802.11 kind of falls. And it falls down like in the physical / data link layer. Some of the things that the protocol utilizes is the actual MAC address of some of these wireless network cards. And a lot of researchers found that what they did was they kind of built on top of that protocol security apparatuses such as authentication and encryption. And some of the techniques that they used are WEP and WPA, the WPA2 that we kind of are utilizing now today. And WEP stands for Wired Equivalent Privacy, which is, it's kind of funny now because that encryption standard has been broken for a very long time, and it's not really the equivalent of wired. And its predecessor, WPA, stands for Wi-Fi Protected Access. If we go on to the next slide, I'll actually talk about how Wi-Fi security is handled right now. The way that it kind of works is through a type of handshake. And in this handshake, you can see that it starts off, I'm kind of really going to the basics here for you guys, is the client will actually send a request to the access point to connect. We say, hey, I want to connect to the network. what the access point does is it sends that client a challenge, sort of like a encrypt this text for me, and the client will go ahead and encrypt it with a pre-shared key. This is known as your key that you use to put into the wireless or to the wireless network in order to connect to it. The client will then encrypt this text and then send that encrypted text back up to the access point, and the access point will actually check it in regards to its pre-saved configuration key, and it'll see, does the encryption match? If it matches, welcome aboard, you're on the network. If it doesn't, disconnect it, drop the connection, and that's kind of how the handshake works. Earlier systems, like I said, adopted the WEP standard for authentication, which was inherently broken because it utilizes RC4 algorithm and these things called IVs, which are initialization vectors. And these initialization vectors are sort of the the reason why WEP kind of fell apart, because they are only 24-bit kind of keys. They're really short, and the way that WEP kind of works, even in like the white paper of how RC4 kind of was released, they said, do not reuse the same key when you're using this encryption standard. But what WEP does is it utilizes the exact same key with these IVs attached to them. So the way that attackers kind of broke into these networks, and how they still do, is they would just sort of put their wireless cards into monitor mode, so they listen to all of the traffic between the clients and the access point, between the access point back down to the clients, and they'll grab these packets, and they're looking for these IVs, which are actually sent in plain text, and they would wait until they get two that actually match, that are the exact same, and I think the stats are something like, for every 5,000 packets, there's a 50% probability of you finding two IVs that are the exact same. And once they did that, it pretty much only takes a couple of minutes to actually break the password. So WEP is inherently broken. I do not recommend anyone using it for any other wireless routers at home. Definitely look into WPA and WPA2, which utilizes more AES encryption standards, which are a little bit more higher now, which use larger bits and also more dynamic bits that actually change per packet. So not using the exact same packet or the exact same key for every packet that's being sent out. The key actually changes. Like I said, WPA2 is actually replacing WPA, and the reason why is because it's actually adhering to a lot of Wi-Fi standards that are set by the Wi-Fi Alliance, and these guys are the ones who kind of own that trademark that you kind of see up here. That's it's like the inherent Wi-Fi is here kind of logo or sticker that you'll see on a lot of devices. You can't actually use that sticker or that device anywhere. You need to actually have a device that supports WPA2, and if it doesn't, it's trademark infringement. So just a little food for thought for you guys. But that's kind of like wireless security in a nutshell. I really wanted to dive more into these attack techniques, but I want to give you guys a little bit of a fundamental understanding of the Wi-Fi network and how security kind of works. So without further ado, we're going to go right into Wi-Fi attack techniques. I'm going to be going through a whole bunch of different types of attacks, roughly around 16. They're all going to be kind of similar, but as I start drilling down further and further, you'll see how some of these attacks kind of rely on these earlier attacks as sort of like preemptive fundamentals that you need to do before you can initiate some of these, crazy like sinkhole, wormhole attacks. So I'm going to get started on this first sort of type of attack that you can do on a wireless network, known as a passive attack. Just like the word says, it's passive. You're not actively attacking any packets. You're not trying to inject anything. You're just listening. You're just kind of waiting. And in this picture here, you can see a map. And in this map, you see a whole bunch of red dots, a couple of green dots, and a few blue dots. That's actually an individual who decided to drive up and down all these roads and utilize this technique called war driving, which is a type of passive attack where they just put their wireless card in monitor mode and they listen to all the SSIDs that they're sort of coming in contact to. They're looking at the strength of these networks, they're logging all this information, they're looking at what type of encryption standards they use, and you can see that everything that's in red is either an open network or something that uses a WEP encryption that's easily broken into. And for WEP encryption breaking, you need to sort of grab a lot of packets. And sometimes there's no clients that are actively on the network, and the networks are kind of not really busy. So there's a couple tools. The Aircrack suite that you can find in Kali Linux allows you to actually play with the networks. You can send some deauth packets and actually cause the router to, move some traffic around, which will allow you to grab more of those IVs. You can see here that you can see a couple of green ones and a few blue ones. But when this individual did their war driving attack, they kind of saw that a lot of corporations were still using WEP encryption for some of their routers. One of the war driving tools that I'm familiar with, NetStumbler. It's super easy to use, super easy to install, and sort of the next generation of this sort of passive attack that we're kind of seeing is war flying, where we're seeing individuals actually strapping on wireless cards or even Android phones to drones and flying them over neighborhoods, on top of corporations, dropping these phones on top of big corporate buildings and just having them sit there as like wireless sort of information gathering tools. They'll later use them for a persistent sort of tunnel into these corporations by just leaving a phone on top of a building somewhere that's really close to the router. And I did a whole piece on the evolution of drones in the battlefield from an electronic warfare perspective. You can see on my blog. The next type of attack is obviously a little more active. These active attacks involve you spoofing your IP address or actually causing harm to the network by dropping some of these packets in the air, whether it's through collision or injection. And so these sort of active attacks really kind of hinder a network, either in its performance or in its routing tables. And active attacks are the ones that are a little bit easier to find. These passive attacks, when someone's just listening on your network, it's really hard for you to kind of detect these because they're inherently silent. So we'll move on to the next section, the man-in-the-middle attack. So in this sort of attack technique, an attacker will position themselves sort of in the middle of this network, between the client and the wireless access point. What the man in the middle will do is use their standard wireless radio to somewhat impersonate one or the other. Either impersonate the client, or impersonate the access point, or impersonate both, if they really wanted to. And what they can do, for instance, is they can listen in on some TCP sessions with a server, and they could, go ahead and say, I'm Facebook, and I'll throw up a Facebook web page. All it takes is for a client to just say, yeah, I agree, let me bypass the security, and I really want to just hit Facebook, and they're now connecting to me instead of going out to Facebook, and I could easily send them a Facebook splash screen for them to put in their email address and their password, and I'll just put it into a log file stored locally on my computer. So that's the type of man-in-the-middle attack. Another tool that I'm a big fan of is Wi-Fi Fisher, which